basketball is in the books for us as of last night. The what I thought might have been even more intense and a fun watch than the Lakers Warriors game was the Warriors Grizzlies game. But we'll kind of recap here all that, in just a second. And obviously, we're going to do a quick little playoff preview for the West and East Conference because obviously as of recording this, some start tonight. So we got to get it in or
Yeah.
it's not happening. So here we are. Let's start with the play-in tournament, though, as our warm-up. I mean, in the East, the Wizards lost to Boston and then worked the Pacers. And then the Pacers actually working the Hornets before that. So that kind of the East, I guess it didn't really shake out any differently than if the 7 and 8 just had gotten in.
Yeah.
So that is what it is. And then in the West, Memphis gets in as the 9 seed. They beat the Spurs and then the Warriors, which is hella impressive. And then obviously the Warriors lost to the Lakers. LeBron hitting. Do we call that? I have beef with calling that a game winner. I get it. It was the shot that made them win, but there was 50 seconds left. Like their defense won that game.
Yeah, they do. Well, they made it seem like a buzzer beater. It's a
Yeah,
game-winning shot, and I think, like, by technicality, like, it was the last shot of the game. They won the
sure.
game 103 to 100, so I get that point. It was a super clutch shot. It's one of the
Yes.
better shots of LeBron's career, which is crazy to think about, but I think that is one of them right there, especially with just the degree of difficulty on it,
Sure.
too, with
Yeah.
the shot clock going down, all that, yada, yada, yada. But you're right. I did when I like it when I got the push alert. It did seem like a buzzer beater. Like I was watching the game, but I got that. I'm like, oh, like I had that hesitation for a second. It made it seem like it happened with 1.2
Right.
seconds on the clock or something like that.
Like honestly, I know we mentioned it, the Memphis and Warriors game when Curry hit the shot at the end of, I guess it would have been overtime with like point two or 2 point something left. He hit this monster three. They're still down by 2 points, but I was like, when he made that, I was like, it's over. Somehow the Warriors are going to win this now. There's
Right,
two
right, right.
seconds left. I don't know how they do it. The Curry just hit that shot. They're going to win the whole thing. But either way,
Yeah, no, it was definitely crazy. I mean, like you said, we talked last week about overall the success of the play-in, and I don't think that that's going anywhere, and because it made the last month competitive. So if
sure.
you want to hear, like, I guess our overall thoughts on that specifically, go back to the intro of last episode for warm-up jumpers. But with this one, I mean, again, to me, it lived up to the hype. The West was definitely better than the East. I 100% agree with you there. I mean, the Eastern Conference games. I mean, Indiana took Charlotte to the
If
woodshed. I mean,
Well,
they just
yeah.
obliterated
If
them.
if you're somebody that's trying to argue against a play-in tournament, you're going to use the East as an example, where it's like, well, it didn't really do anything other than just make us watch two more games, essentially, of basketball. Which I mean, there's an argument for it, but at the same time, they're like, now these two teams that were going to be underdogs anyway, going up against the Nets and 76ers, now have two more games and less rest, and here we go.
Well, it's example number 9,000 too of
Yeah,
just the Western Conference overall being better than the Eastern Conference. Like
sure.
I do think there's something to say there. Granted, Indiana wasn't at full strength, and so to that point, I think they could have been a little better. In terms of Charlotte, same deal with them. Gordon Hayward not being healthy, and Charlotte will be there in the next couple of years. Like Charlotte was playing with house money. I think it's
Right.
disappointing the way that they just got absolutely smoked like that.
To
And I
that
think you're
though,
disappointed in the 8-9 game. I think that's where it stinks. I mean, the Boston Washington game, it wasn't a bad game. That was entertaining for like I want to say like two and a half, three
sure.
quarters. Like it was competitive, and it was competitive if nothing else, or it was cool if nothing else, just to watch Jason Tatum drop 50 points and watch Kemba Walker be excellent as well. Like at
Yeah.
that point, there at least you could stick your star power on that. The West, all four of them were good. I mean, that's the thing, because
Oh,
even Grizzlies Spurs was a good, entertaining game. Like that got lost in how good Lakers Warriors was and how that lived up to the hype of the LeBron Steph battle. But I mean, of course, all of them in the Western Conference are extremely good. The Memphis Golden State game was excellent, super duper exciting. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But I mean, sure, the argument, if you're anti playing game, is exactly what you said, is that nothing really changes sometimes like it did in the East. The true 7 and 8 seeds ended up seeding exactly where they are, and that the games weren't quite as competitive.
right.
But at the same time, like I think overall, to me, the potential is there and it shows what it could be. Like I mean, we got like again with the quality of those Western Conference games, and even with Boston and Washington being watchable. I think the extra basketball works, and I think because of its effect on the regular season in that last month and making that
Yeah.
competitive and making those 4, 5, 6 seeding type games competitive as well, the overall effect to me is worth, even if it's a blowout. Like, it stinks if that's the only game is on and that it's a blowout, but to me, the results, given what we saw this year, I would have zero reason to change it. I think it's fine. I think they absolutely nailed it, kind of like I said last week.
I I have a few thoughts with that. Part of me wants to make the argument, does a 10th seed deserve to really even have a shot at the playoffs anyway? And I know
Mhm.
you're going to point back to like seasons where I just remember because we were doing the podcast, the Suns, right? They were like, I think they ended up being the ninth seed, but they ended up having like, it was like
Yeah, like
40
48 wins or
wins.
something,
And,
or
and yeah. And so like to that, I get there's going to be scenarios where that's the case, but like this year, right? Do you want a team that only has 33 wins, in the playoffs? And I get it, the Wizards and the Celtics only have, a few more than that, but that's the Eastern Conference and everyone will point at the fact that the Eastern Conference at times isn't as competitive as the West where, the Lakers who were in seventh place have 42 wins. So, like I I think it was great and I loved this style of play in tournament where it's like you kind of make them battle and then the losers go play in a loser bracket kind of, and then that's the 8 seed. But I think to an average casual NBA fan, it might come off as a little bit confusing to follow along and understand what needs to happen and what needs to go where. And of course, obviously, if you're the 7th seed, you're pissed off about it because it's like, well, we should have this outright. Like, we shouldn't be fighting for the thing. Part of me feels like the NBA might have been closer to what they should do when they were in the bubble, where it's like, okay, seven's locked in, eight, if you're within what was it, 4 games, 3 games of that, then you have to play in. And what I think they should do, what I think would be kind of cool is do that with, if the Grizzlies have 38 wins, right?
Mhm.
And the Warriors have 39. Okay, so they're within 1 game. And then say the Spurs had 37 wins instead of only 33. Make all three of them play in some kind of round robin esque kind of thing to then figure out who's the 8th seed. Like if everybody within that 3 game gap gets a shot, and that's how you figure out the 8th seed. So then there'll be years where really you only have the Warriors and Grizzlies go at it this year, or like this this season in the East you would have had Wizards, Pacers, and Hornets.
Mhm.
Right. And so then you have those three kind of battle for the 8th seed in some way. Whereas, so then if you are a few games out at the end of the season, you're like, oh, we can actually make a push for this and at least get a shot at getting that kind of playoff intensity basketball. So let's win some games to get within a 3 game window of the 8th seed, and then we're good, you know?
Yeah, no, and you're not wrong there, and I understand the argument completely. Like, if you want to drop the tens, I get it a little more because
Mm-hmm.
it does start to get to a point where it's like,
But
how even good are these teams? I mean,
right.
and if you look at even the results from this year, San Antonio was competitive. I don't want to write them off the way that it was with Charlotte. And again, Charlotte dealing with injuries. I'm not trying to dump on them, but like Charlotte got destroyed in the
And
playing game,
and
and
to
both
that,
tens lost their games.
right.
Like they didn't advance on. It was
To
only one of the nines that upset. So.
to that, you won't be able to use anything from the Eastern Conference going forward. Like you're not going to be able to say, well, the Wizards just absolutely got worked by the 76ers. Fingers crossed for that, to be honest, as a homer. But you're not going to be able to like go and say, well, the Wizards just got absolutely blown out and it's because of the play-in tournament. At the end of the day, it was only 2 more games for them, and they were going to be the 8th seed anyway if they didn't have a play-in tournament. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
so everything on the East is kind of like the play-in tournament didn't even happen, except for Celtics fans and Wizards fans are gonna do the complaining on the side of, well, we had to play a few extra games, and that's fine. But you know, I think there should be something to it. I think they need to. For a really horrible way to put it, I think they need to dumb it down a little bit. Like the 7 and the 8 play, and then the loser of that plays the winner of 8 or 9 and 10. Like it's confusing, and the graphic is sort of confusing to look at. Now I know we and probably you listening to the podcast, you talk or listen to a lot of basketball stuff, so it's not confusing to us. but for a casual person to just go, oh, why is this game important? It could get a little bit confusing. But I will say on top of that, another counter argument to say that the play-in's working is that I saw a stat saying the Warriors Lakers game had like 5.3 million people viewing it, which is huge because everyone will make the argument basketball's numbers are down, the viewership's down, which from some guys that work in the radio station across the building from us, they say that's kind of across all sports in general. So, if you're going to try to make that argument, you're just trying to make that argument to make it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like you said, the TV ratings are great. TNT and ESPN on
Yeah.
both networks absolutely killing it. That Phoenix team, by the way, in 2013 won 48 games and didn't make the playoffs. You want to talk about being brutal? That was
They
just,
would
and I
be
mean,
they would be in second place in the East.
I know it's crazy, and I mean, and granted, longer season. I do think there is
Sure.
that caveat.
It is
Like
10 games.
there were more games. Those
Do
10
you
games matter, but
Do you think that players are going to fight for the fact that it stays? I mean, obviously this year it started later, so that's why
oh,
there's
it's not
less games.
going anywhere. I don't think there's any chance it's going anywhere. It was successful. Like that's the
But
thing is if it was successful, if it made money, if it drew TV
but
ratings and all these other things, like the quality of the games were good. I think there's going to be some players who complain about it, but I think there are also a lot of players who say don't get in the playing tournament, and then it's not
right.
an issue. Like that's what
But I
Dame
mean,
Lillard was saying.
well, and I mean from the standpoint of 72 games, do you think they stay with that, or are they bouncing back to 81? Or
No, I
or do
think
you think
they're
they should?
I would like to see them stay at 72 and
So too.
spread it out though. My thing is if they want to stay at 72 and keep it the way it is, like I'm fine chopping off 10 regular season games if it means less load management. I
Sure,
just think they
of
need to
course.
spread the schedule out. Like the big problem this year, and granted, this is a weird season with COVID and all that. So but the problem is that you had all this travel condensed and it was trying to make up time and you had way more back to backs than you would usually and you had going on these road trips that you may not otherwise and games getting rescheduled and so you'd have to be in situations that you wouldn't have been prepared
Yeah.
for and so because of that we saw more injuries. Like I think to me it's proven like when you spread the season out a little bit more, these guys are probably more likely to stay healthy, are just there's less wear and tear on their bodies. So I think in that perspective they should, I mean, they just need to keep it spread out as possible. Like that's been one of the biggest complaints of the players so far. But I think the play-in is here to stay. I don't think it's going anywhere. It was too successful. Going to the actual teams from the play-in. So given the results, how it all played out, the Lakers are going to be 7 in the West. The Grizzlies now are locked into the 8th seed. Like we said in the East, it's going to be Boston and Washington. Boston will play Brooklyn. Washington will play Philly. Phoenix will play the Lakers in the West, and then Utah will play the Grizzlies in the West. I mean, we'll get into the X's and O's as we break down round one, but I mean, going back to this play-in tournament itself, I mean, were there any big surprises here? I mean, the Lakers game was super competitive, but they end up holding on. I didn't think we did expect that. I guess we should say Steph Curry. I mean, I guess it's wild to see how well he played, but that's the story of all season is how well he played, and sometimes it didn't matter. I mean, the fact that they gave the Lakers everything they had only ended up losing by 3 points in that back and forth fight, and they were up by a lot for large portions of that game. I was a little surprised to see them run out of gas against Memphis. But also, I did think they were going to win that game. And I think it's super disappointing if you're the Warriors to not get in after all that and at least be the 8th seed, given how well Steph was playing, the, MVP top 3 caliber player that he's been this season, that
Sure.
type of year that he's having. But on the other token, I mean, what a coming out party for the young Grizzlies. I mean, you want to talk about, because I mean, remember they were here last year. They were the 8 for most of the season, but they couldn't make it. They got bumped out in that play-in game when Portland knocked them off. Now here they are in that same type of situation where I think most people had them as the underdog. John Morant comes out and has a phenomenal game, but overall the team across the board, they got it done when it mattered. And now, this was their national coming out party and saying, no, we're here. We're ready. We are ready for the big time. We're not just a cute young core anymore.
Yeah. That it was huge, and I think it puts John Morant on the map even more than he already was. To like we always keep talking about, to the casual NBA fan, like that was huge for Ja, and I really think it probably worked against I mean, I guess we would say this for either one, but maybe in a way because the Memphis and Warriors, they were the last team to play each other before the play-in tournament, right? So they
Yes.
kind of got a good gauge for each other and how they needed to approach it. I mean, a big conversation of the Warriors game and a big conversation of the Memphis game will be and was for the Lakers was the turnovers that was happening with Steph. Like
Yeah.
Steph balled out, don't get me wrong, but there were some turnovers. And you go back to the Memphis Golden State Warriors game before the play-in tournament, they had him at 7 turnovers as well. So maybe they figured something out there and kind of kept that in their back pocket. I mean, Dylan Brooks was. I think they showed at one point the stat is Curry only had 6 points while he was guarding him and had like 16 or 17 against the rest of the team when someone else was guarding him. Like just locked him down. So,
Yeah.
I mean, shout out to the Memphis Grizzlies for really just being a team of essentially underrated guys, if you really think about it, and not misfits, but you look at the team and you're like, man, I forgot half these guys played in the NBA, or I didn't even know that. Like, a lot of people. I
Well, they're all
was
young.
well,
They're
and
all
I was
super young.
well, and I was watching the game last night, and at the end in overtime, Grayson Allen had 2 great threes back to back, and my buddies were like, "Oh my God, Grayson Allen's still in the NBA," and I was like, "What do you mean still in the NBA?" Yeah,
Yeah,
like
yeah, he's well, and that was what really. I mean, obviously, Ja Morant is the story and
of
should get all
course,
the credit. I mean, he had 35 points and most impressively, 5 of 10 from beyond the arc. He's not really that great of a 3-point shooter, but he was knocking them down last night.
yeah,
But it was the Grizzlies' depth. I mean, if you pulled up the box score from this game and didn't tell me the score, and you told me that Kyle Anderson had 9 points, Dylan Brooks had 14 on 7 of 22 shooting, Jaren Jackson had 10 and the Grizzlies won this game. I mean, it's the
hmm
depth that won it. It's Xavier Tillman coming off the bench and giving them 11 points. It's 12 out of Grayson Allen, like you said, your boy, 4 of 5 from beyond the arc, a huge game.
Jacksonville
Desmond
Connect,
Bain had
man.
10 points. Like, that's who won them the game. It wasn't the starters necessarily, but that's the story of the Grizzlies. The Grizzlies have sneaky depth, and that's where I think that it's kind of surprising to people is where everybody focuses on Ja Morant, but a lot of these guys aren't household names. I mean, who's the second most famous player on this team? Jaren Jackson, and Jaren Jackson hasn't even really been that great since coming back from injury. Granted, I still think it's a lot of that. Like, I think he's slowly working his way back in and is just having to do that when the Grizzlies are playing super meaningful basketball. But credit to the Grizz. This was an impressive win. And to me, it's more importantly, if you're a Grizzlies fan going forward, it's something that you build on. Like, you want to see your young teams get better every single year and take a step. To me, some could have viewed this. I mean, you could have viewed this as a lateral season for the Grizzlies if they were in the same exact position of
Yeah,
last year, where it's like, hey, that's great. You had an awesome regular season. Your team was fun, but you made the play-in game and didn't get the chance to play meaningful
yeah,
basketball. Now the Grizzlies are going to play meaningful basketball. I'm not. We'll have the full preview against Utah in a little bit. I'm not saying they're going to beat Utah, but they're going to compete. And like we said, for young teams like this, that matters going forward. This is how Ja Morant is going to relish this experience. Jaren Jackson,
yeah.
Dylan Brooks, run it down the line. This is big for them.
I completely agree. The last thing I wanted to hit for the play-in tournament was something that happened last year too, and I think we had this conversation was the stats aren't being counted for regular season or playoffs.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Personally, I feel like they should just count them as playoff stats.
I
Like
do
just
too.
just throw them in there. But I brought that up to some coworkers, and they were like, "Well, maybe they haven't done that yet. Like they're holding on to them, right? And they're hoping that potentially." Uh, they decide a way that they're going forward forever with a playing tournament, and then they'll retroactively put those stats back into the record books wherever it stands. Because yeah, they should just be considered playoff stats. Like Jason Tatum not having a 50 piece on his playoff stat record is gonna
Yeah.
be crazy.
Well, it's a playing game or
Yeah,
it's a playoff game. Like
yeah,
the expectation is there. Like, was there not intensity there? Was there
yeah.
not meaningful? Like, what exactly do you want there? Like, if there's not pressure in that type of game, if that's not a playoff atmosphere, what exactly is? I'm not saying
Mm-hmm.
it's the NBA Finals game 7, but it's a playoff game. It's not a regular season game. Nobody's load managing this game. Nobody's, resting guys or trying to take games off. Like, no, that was a real playoff game. It's kind of the NBA. I get it that when it's new, you got to figure this out. But no, these should absolutely be playoff stats. To me, it's weird if it's not a playoff stat.
I agree. I agree. So, um, we'll see where that goes, and I wonder if that's just what they're doing. Waiting to essentially um, see what they want to do full time going
Yeah.
forward, and then the stats will be added however they need to be added. You know.
Yeah, I think the one thing we know is that it's just here to stay. I think for now, like at the end of the day, like if the games are good and the TV ratings were good, I don't know. It's hard for me to see it go away. Like once the money is there, especially, which I mean, it sounds sad, but it's like I mean, we see it with the NFL, for example, with them adding this regular season game. It's like once the money is there, it's hard to see them turning back. It feels like they already, you can experiment in the bubble, but it worked, and I think it
Yeah.
worked this year more than it didn't work, and that's exactly what you want to see if you're the NBA. Welcome everybody to the Drive and Dish NBA podcast. My name is Kevin Rayfuse. Joining me as always, my co-host Justin Kuzart.
Oh, I gotta pull up. I didn't even have my tweet ready. I
Well, it's
totally
fine. You
forgot.
don't need to worry about your tweet. I was going to say, I can just say, welcome to the 30 Club. Our pal Justin turned
Oh.
30 this week. Does your back hurt already?
No, but dude, I woke up and I actually have like a weirdly gross looking bruise on the back of my leg. And I don't know how I got it. Like I just woke up and was like, "Oh, what is that?"
You just don't remember smacking anything or like.
No, I think honestly, the only thing I can think it is we went and had a drink the other night to celebrate, and while we were there, we were sitting on these bar stools essentially,
Uh,
and they were wooden, and I remember them being uncomfortable. So maybe there was just like pressure on my leg wrong, and that's how I got this bruise. But yeah, waking up 30, just have this massive bruise on the back of my leg, body's already falling apart. It's like cool. Well, this is 30.
Whenever I drink now, and this is kind of across the board, it's like whether I have, like, if I have one, it's not a big deal. But like if I have any more than two drinks, and it doesn't matter whether it's three or whether it's 10. Obviously, it's three more than it's a lot more 10 these days. But
Yeah.
whenever I go to sleep, no matter what, I just wake up in the morning and my calves are stiff, and I can't
Huh.
explain it. But my
It's got to be
calves
a
are stiff.
dehydration thing.
That's what I'm thinking, but it's just kind of funny how it's always my calves that are stiff every single time, no matter what. Just interesting. But anyways, happy birthday again, Justin. Do
Thanks.
we got a tweet this week?
Yeah, it's just didn't take long, and then all caps Memphis.
Okay. I mean, I'm gonna guess that that's Ja, and if
Yeah,
it's not Ja, well, okay, sweet. Yeah, I
yeah,
mean,
that's Shaw.
listen, it's the coming out party. That's the
Mhm.
thing. Is he's still very young. I think NBA fans have known about Ja Morant, but to me, for again, when we talk about the casuals, what a better way to come out and
Yeah,
pull the upset too. I mean, you're beating Steph Curry at the end of the day. Like we knew what type of zone Steph was in right now. I think most of us, including me, like I'll say, I mean, I Golden State in that game. I thought the Warriors were going to win, especially how they played the Lakers. Like I figured there'd be a little bit of a hangover, but I mean, not and it's not fair to say it was a hangover. It went to overtime, so it wasn't like it wasn't like it was some blowout or something like that. But I mean, the Grizzlies also could have had the letdown too because they were up big early in that game. Like when the Warriors came back, that could have been one where the inexperience factor kind of took over, and it didn't. And that's exactly what should be encouraging going forward if you're Memphis.
yeah, I completely agree, and wanted just to give Ja another shout out again because he's definitely deserving of it, and you know, was probably the game of the play-in tournament. I know a lot of people are gonna say the Lakers Warriors, but it's got to be the overtime win.
Yeah, either way, just good back-to-back ones in the Western Conference. Leave us a review on iTunes, good or bad. We will read them on the podcast. If you're not an Apple user, Amazon Music, Google Play Store, Spotify, Spreaker, TuneIn, Stitcher, Player FM, anywhere you can find a podcast, you can find us.
Yep, and follow us on YouTube. We started doing little videos, the entire podcast, but also clips of the show. So if you want to go back and watch our chat, you can always keep up with us at Drive and Dish on YouTube.
Yeah, like the Facebook page as well at Drive and Dish NBA podcast. And now a word from our sponsors.
So let's get into the playoffs, which will be started by the time you're listening to this, most likely. But for us, have not started. Everybody's at zero, essentially. So here's what's happening. In the West is where we're going to start. The number one seed's going to take on the 8 seed, obviously Utah versus Memphis. Then you've got the Clippers taking on Dallas, Denver taking on the Portland Trailblazers, and then Phoenix going up against the Lakers. I guess we'll just start working our way down and start with Utah, Memphis. I mean, we were already talking about, Ja Morant and giving them praise and stuff like that. And that being said, I think this is not going to be a very fun match for the Grizzlies to be walking into. I think Mike Conley is going to have a fire under him which should be so fun to see. On top of that, I think Jordan Clarkson and Joe Ingles are just, probably should be in the six-man, conversation at some point.
They are. They're finalists.
Yeah, yeah. And
They
so
both are.
Jaren Jackson, also like you were alluding to, still kind of trying to get himself worked back in. Only had 15 minutes against the Warriors, and something that I noticed too is the Jazz are the only team ranked in the top 5 for both 3-point percentage with their shots that came from 3-point range, which doesn't make sense. That stat that they sent, like ESPN sent that to us, and that didn't make sense to me. And just saying it out loud made me realize it didn't make sense even more. But either way, the point that they were bringing up is that the Grizzlies have the sixth biggest discrepancy from 3-point range, getting outscored by 5.1 points per game from beyond the arc, which then leads back to the fact that the Jazz were the only team ranked in the top 5 for 3-point percentage. And so, yeah, it's probably going to be a little rough for them in that scenario. But, that's not to diminish what the Grizzlies, did to get here. I just think they're going up against the best team in the NBA, essentially record-wise, at least I should say. So that's kind of the way I'm viewing it.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's going to sound weird because we just spent the first how many minutes praising Memphis and talk about how
Right.
great of a job they did. But I think in a way, if you're Utah, you're almost relieved a little bit that you don't have to deal with Steph Curry potentially going
Mhm.
crazy for, what could be 7 games. Now, I mean, the big question mark for me and what all eyes are all going to be on is Donovan Mitchell. As Donovan Mitchell hasn't played, he's coming back from the
Yep.
injury, and that he's going to be, Utah's going to want to ease him back in. I think Memphis, they should be able to handle Memphis regardless. Like Utah stayed afloat as the number one seed. They have great depth.
Sorry, I'm gonna mute you for a sec. You crackled up for a second there. See if we can get you back in here.
I think they're going to handle Memphis, I guess is my point. Like, I think they're going to. I love Utah's depth. They're the number one seed for a reason. Again, an excellent defensive team as well. I think Rudy Gobert will be able to just close down the paint entirely. Memphis, not a great 3-point shooting team. Like you said, Utah, an excellent 3-point shooting team. I like Utah's depth a little bit more with Clarkson and Ingles coming off the bench. Bogdanovich has been excellent in Donovan Mitchell's absence. So that's the thing. He's even stepped up and played a lot of those minutes as they ease him back in. I mean, I think I think it's probably a 5 or 6 game series only because I think Donovan Mitchell is easing back in, but I'm leaning more towards 5. Like, I think Utah will handle the business. And, Memphis will keep these games competitive, but I think Utah will be moving on without breaking a sweat too much here.
I figured out that stat. I read it wrong. It was my fault.
Oh,
ESPN
okay.
wasn't dumb. The Jazz were the only team that ranked in the top 5 for both 3-point percentage, which the team is 38.9%, which is fourth in the league. And they're also in the top 5 for the percentage of their shots that actually come from 3-point range. They shoot that at a 48.8% clip, which is actually first in the NBA. And they're also really good at limiting 3-point shots for their opponents. They actually outscore their opponents by 17.6 points per game from 3-point range, which is the biggest differential in the 43 seasons of the NBA 3-point line. So just kind of keep that in mind. I am tempted to say this is a 4-game series, not hating on the Grizz. I love my Grizz, but I just think I think I think it's gonna be 4 games, and the Grizz are gonna learn real quick why the Jazz are the number 1 seed in the Western Conference.
Yeah, the Jazz should again. They'll handle their business. Is the name of the game, and I think the Jazz will be fine in the first round.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's just do this by bracket. So, sticking in that side of the bracket, you've got the Clippers and you've got the Mavericks. This is the biggest discrepancy in terms of betting odds in Vegas. Like, they have the Clippers as the biggest favorite out of essentially, or at least of the 4 series that were out that didn't involve play-in teams. Of these, first round series. I think this is the same sort of deal. Like, I think the Clippers are much better equipped for the playoffs than they were last year. I like the rotations a lot better. Like we talked about, the guys that they went out and got in the offseason and then traded for with Rondo. But like, I think Ibaka is really going to help them come playoff time. I think Luke Kennard is the type of player who can, really help them as well. Playoff time, space the floor a little bit. Like Kawhi Leonard is just scoring an extremely efficient clip. And again, we got to see with Paul George. But here's the thing, like, I still think the Clippers are going to be fine regardless. Like, I think they beat this Dallas team last year. And to me, this is a worse iteration of that Dallas team. Like, I think this Dallas team took a step back. I mean, they have some, besides Luca, obviously, like, they have a couple players that I like. Like, Jalen Brunson has been good this year, but he's dealing with injuries. Tim Hardaway Jr. has been excellent. He's the guy you got to worry about other than Luca really filling up the stat sheet for Dallas. But I think KP has been limited a little defensively. He hasn't looked like quite the same player coming off this injury, and I think that really matters a lot too in this series. I think the Clippers cruise. I think this is the same sort of deal. I think we're looking at a 5-game series here.
Wow. I wonder what the matchup will look like for Kristaps Porzingis if Porzingis is healthy. Obviously, that's always the kind of word around Porzingis. Because when you think about it, he's probably going to be the most talented, guy, a big man, I should say, on the court when doing their thing. So that could be a potential matchup problem for the Clippers. I don't necessarily know where they go, and then I guess the counter argument to the Clippers' point guard situation against Luka is Beverly's just returning from the injury. Reggie Jackson has played well, but Rondo's also in the fold as well. So you wonder which one, Ty Lue's going to go with and kind of try to throw at Luka. Maybe it is just a rotation of guys and see who can do what. I mean, obviously, the defense of Patrick Beverly is the first thing that comes to mind when you think about a matchup. But again, he might not be fully up to game speed, just getting back from that injury. So I think I wonder if they tried to use Porzingis early to kind of get some mismatches going there.
Yeah, I mean, I that's what they're going to need to. I mean, they're going to have him firing on all cylinders. There's no doubt about it. I just, again, I think the depth is too strong with the Clippers. And that's where I worry about it. Like, again, they're built for the playoffs this year. This is a matchup that we've already seen them take advantage of. Like, we just have a more locked in Paul George this year. Like, I hate to just, again, I because it's such a prove it thing, but I feel like Paul George is way on a mission this year. Um, I think they cruise. I can't shake that feeling that they just end up cruising throughout
Well,
this. So
and a big thing that everyone talks about, or we were talking about with the Utah Jazz, was the 3-point shooting, and the Clippers are obviously up there too in terms of that 3-point shooting. They were in that list of what I was talking about a few times. I think I read. Hold on, I'm hoping I still have it here. They have a league high 7 players who shot 38% or better on their last 100 attempts from 3-point range.
mhm.
And I think they named some of them. Yeah, Jackson, yeah, Jackson, Leonard, George, Morris, Kennard, Nick Batum. Nick Batum? It's still so wild to me to say his name.
Dude, I mean, what a renaissance he's
Yeah,
had this year. I mean, Nick Batum has been, I mean, he's been cashing these checks in Charlotte. So, like, guys, I can't say it's been bad for Nick Batum, but I mean, Nick Batum was considered, I mean, he was a corpse essentially going into this year. He was a complete non-thought for most guys. And I mean, he's been a huge part of that rotation this year.
I think I think this one goes 6, with that 6th game being really close to the Mavs pushing it to a 7-game thing. But I think the Clippers are going to get it in 6.
Wow. Okay. All right. I mean, I don't know. I think they clean up. I think if it goes 7, I'm peak concerned on the Clippers level. Like, I
Mm,
think if I'm the Clippers and I want to shut the noise up, I want to cruise through this
yeah,
because at this point, like, they're going to be on a collision course with Utah in the second round,
yeah.
which I'm not going to disrespect Utah and be like that's a series the Clippers should win or that the Clippers should just beat the hell out of Utah, I should say. But I mean, honestly, like I do think the Clippers probably should win that series. Like I think there's more expectations there. Like Utah is never going to go out soft like that. Like that's a really good team. I'm not going to ever underrate a team that won 52 games, but like I don't know. I still think I'd pick the Clippers in that series.
Yeah, and so yeah, I think that's where it ends up going. And then the next matchup that we would be diving into would be the Nuggets and Blazers. Dame versus Jokic. Do you think? Do you?
It's just hilarious because they're so different. It's
Yeah,
like, and they are. They're
but that's
obviously the two head-to-head stars,
right.
but like what? Like it's just funny the thought of them guarding each other for a whole game.
Could you imagine? I mean, whatever. Either way, so Denver defends the 3-pointer really well. That's the big thing that people are pointing out. At least they're number 2 in the league in 3-point attempts. Or Portland ranks high in attempts. Denver defends well, so it's two kind of clashes. The depth is a big conversation. Obviously, Murray limits Denver's offense a little bit, but we thought that was going to make them falter, and it didn't seem to make them falter. So, you know, the new addition with Aaron Gordon, which I keep forgetting that happened, but Aaron Gordon's over there now, and that changes some things for them. The Blazers, defensive rating kind of at the bottom. So that being said, do you think there's a chance some Dame time magic comes through and they pull off the upset?
I mean, they could. I mean, again, because a lot of the times we're going to see with Denver. I mean, not having Jamal Murray, who we saw in the bubble last year, was excellent. You wonder if you're going to miss him, especially late in games in this series. But I mean, you got to give him credit. Michael Porter Jr. has been awesome, and he's really
Yeah.
stepped up in the absence. I mean, we've seen him, and teams know he's got a bigger role. Like the pressure's been on him, and he just has elevated his scoring even when he's defended more, which I mean is just outrageous. And it shows the potential that he has if he continues to stay healthy, knock on wood, like he has. I mean, Jokic, what else is there to be said? I mean, he's played every game this season. He leads literally every major offensive category in the NBA, regular, counting, and advanced from the center position. I mean, Dame is Dame, though. We know what Dame does. We know, I mean, I'm sure he goes for, I could easily see Dame going for 50 in at least one of these games. Like, I could see that happening for sure. CJ McCollum is that type of player, too, who obviously can get a lot of buckets in a hurry. Portland just kind of stinks defensively. And I mean, that's where the drawback is that they're not very good on that end. I think Portland's depth is super suspect as well. And so to that point, I think this is going to be a close series. If Jamal Murray was here, this wouldn't even be I think Denver would cruise. I still have Denver in 6. I know Portland is playing great and did play some of their best basketball at the end of the year to avoid the play-in. I just, again, the way Denver stay afloat, it's really been impressive to me. And I think they get the job done.
I tend to believe you and agree with you that that Denver's gonna get it. Um, the thing I'm thinking about with this is I think either of these team loses and they're not going to feel like they lived up to the expectations of their season. So somebody's going to be disappointed by the end of this. I mean, Portland's gone to the playoffs 8 years in a row.
Oh, yeah.
And so, I mean, both of these, not necessarily with Denver because you have the injury stuff. I feel like if Portland loses, there's going to be, and there already was calls, but there's going to be a really loud call for some sort of change.
Oh, yeah. I think Terry Stotts is out of a job if they lose in the first round. Even with how well they played at the end of the year, like
Yeah.
there were reports already going around that he was potentially had lost the locker room, and that I mean, I think it's just at the point where it's time for a change. Like you said, this Portland team has kind of it's been the same story. Like we've seen them go as far as the conference finals. They make the playoffs every year, so I don't want to just say that this Portland team is a complete. They kind of are the same. You know what I mean?
Dude, not to totally derail the situation here, but I have some breaking news coming through.
Uh huh.
Dave McMiniman tweets out, "News story. The Lakers were notified by the NBA that LeBron James violated protocols by attending an event for his liquor brand earlier this week," a league spokesman told ESPN. Woj follows up and says LeBron James won't be suspended for protocols violations. Natures of events didn't raise a threat level of virus spread as described in Dave McMiniman's story below. Lakers Suns game 1 is on Sunday.
Oh, you guys, come on! You thought LeBron was getting suspended?
Yeah, anybody else is getting suspended, I'll tell you that.
Nah,
Come
I mean,
on.
depends who it is. Depends who it is. Depends how big of a star they are. If it's a role player, I agree. A
I'm telling
star,
you right now. I'm telling you right
Giannis
now.
is not getting suspended. No way. Not ahead of a playoff game. Steph Curry's not getting suspended. He's not even in the playoffs.
I'd be willing to bet you though, if say like big time role player, go back to the Cavs day. Tristan Thompson goes out to what is it? His baby mama's sister's tequila tasting, Kendall Jenner's tequila stuff. He ain't playing that next game.
No, probably not. I mean, look, I'm not going to say that there's not a double standard there, but I mean, look, well, and it also goes back to the question is like, well, LeBron doesn't want to answer the uncomfortable question. He's been really weird about like, he won't answer whether he has the vaccine or not. And so that's kind of the other question is where it's like, look, say you have the vaccine and then it shouldn't be a big deal. But yeah, no, I understand that. Well, it was all over social media too, because like Drake was there and Michael B. Jordan was there. And it was just like, I wondered it was going to be the narrative all over like the ESPN and FS1 shows, the daytime shows, if LeBron had lost that play-in game and had
Mm-hmm.
been at a tequila release party the night before. I could hear Skip Bayless already if that had happened. Obviously, instead that didn't happen. He had a super clutch shot, and the Lakers to handle their business that are on their way to 7. But they're not going to do that ahead of the playoffs.
No. So to that, the game that we just kind of alluded to, Suns versus Lakers, the 2 versus the 7 seed. I think it's kind of a cool. This might not be even the first or second matchup people kind of allude to when it comes to this, but I really think it's going to be a cool matchup to see DeAndre Ayton and Anthony Davis go at it. And see where it can come from. Obviously, defense is going to be a big thing here. Lakers. Um, Hold opponents to just 35% from 3. Suns do it from 35 as well. So, defensive rating wise, the Lakers are number 1 in the NBA at 106.8. The Suns are number 6 at 110.4. Obviously it's Devin Booker, it's Chris Paul, the focal points that I think the Lakers are probably going to hone in on and try to figure out how to slow down or stop so I guess when it comes down to it, I think the conversation leads to one team has a ton of playoff experience, one team doesn't. And how big of a factor will that be?
Well, it's the chemistry thing too, as well. That's what I worry about with the Lakers, and where you
That's
you
true.
got to be a little concerned about, just because LeBron is still coming back. Anthony Davis missed a ton of time this year. They did have a lot of new additions between Dennis Schroeder, between going out and getting Andre Drummond at the deadline. But I think the Lakers' closing lineup has just been great defensively, like you said. I mean, there's it's crazy with the third player at this, but like when Anthony Davis, LeBron, and Alex Caruso are on the floor,
Yeah.
they just put teams in prison. And that to me is, there's something to be said with all the injuries and all the time they've missed about being the number 1 defensive team in the league. And that's why you buy into them and believe in them again come playoff time. I mean, that's what won them the title last year. The cruel irony, of course, is something that we talked about, is Phoenix, who hasn't made the playoffs in how long, had probably the best season they've had in a decade, in terms of just sheer enjoyment and just positivity and everything, and just have to run into Lakers right away because they dealt with a ton of injuries instead of probably. I mean, this is a conference finals matchup essentially
Mm-hmm.
in the first round. Like, no disrespect. Well, no, I mean, yeah, no disrespect to Portland or Denver, but if the Lakers, like, they're gonna, or Phoenix, whoever comes out of this series, they're gonna have a harder time, in my opinion, in this series than they're going to in their next one. Like, I think whoever wins this series is the beyond the favorite to win the next one and go to the conference finals. I'm not backing off my Lakers prediction. I don't think that's going to go anywhere. I still think the Lakers are the best team in the NBA, and to that point, I'm going to pick them to win this series. I think this is a 7-game series, though, and if there's a possibility for the Lakers to get upset, I do think it's now, because Phoenix has the chemistry. They played together all year. I still think the Lakers are figuring it out. And again, on that off chance that LeBron just still isn't 100% yet, that Anthony Davis still isn't 100% yet, as they're figuring it out, this would be the time where kind of that weird variance could happen. Like, Phoenix could win this series. You could talk me into an argument for that. I just don't like. I don't think it's going to happen. The Lakers' biggest concern to me, though, is they got to, like you said, they got to figure out that big man rotation. Like, are you going to play Anthony
Yeah.
Davis in center? Do you start Marc Gasol again, who was super duper effective? Are you giving those minutes to Drummond for sure? You've got Montrezl Harrell. How does he fit in the mix? That's going to be the big question for me, because they've had some misses there in terms of some of the lineups they put together. But again, I think with how well they play defensively, I think they're cruising, and I think that they do end up getting through. I think they sneak by in 7 games. But this is a hard series. Like, this is a hell of a first round series.
Does it surprise? I guess it doesn't necessarily surprise me, but as you might figure in the betting books world, this is sportsbettingdime.com.
Mm-hmm.
59% of the bets coming in are favoring the Lakers at
I mean,
at plus 2.5.
you have LeBron. That's the
Yeah.
thing. And it's just, at the end of the day, like, we've seen LeBron go to the finals and just not break a sweat for the last how many years now. It's hard to bet against that from a betting perspective. And again, you and I know, like, this Phoenix team is really, really good.
Yeah.
This is not going to be your average first round series. Like I said, there's a world where these two teams, if the bracket had broken differently, could very well have been meeting in the conference finals.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that's just not how the bracket broke and how injuries broke. And like I said, that's what's so unfortunate for Phoenix, is it's like, I don't think anyone is going to view this season as a failure for Phoenix, nor should they. But wow, it's just going to look a lot different on paper if they go out in the first round versus, getting the joy of winning
Yeah.
one, maybe even two playoff series, which I think would have been in the position to do. Like I really like this Phoenix team a lot. Chris Paul's been excellent in the playoffs. Again, Devin Booker and DeAndre Ayton, Mikal Bridges, all these guys. Like I think they got that experience last year too in the bubble, where it's like I know
Yeah.
they didn't make the playoffs, but they had to win every single one of those games and did. Like I think that's a pressure-packed situation. So I think to that point, they're not even the inexperienced team that we generally consider them to be sometimes
Yeah.
when you have a first-time playoff team. But I have Lakers in 7. I think this one and the Portland Denver series both go 7. I've got Denver in 7 there. And it's funny because, like I said, on the other side of the brackets, I just think it breaks a lot differently. Like I think I've got Utah in 5 and Clippers in 5. I think both of them cruise into the second round. I think the Lakers and Denver slug it out. I think Portland and Denver to me is the most likely where I can see an upset if there's going to be one. Because like I don't consider the Lakers over Phoenix an upset. Quite the opposite. I think it'd be vice versa. But Portland and Denver, I mean, Denver is the better seed and has kept winning without Jamal Murray. But if Portland comes out, given Dame Lillard, and upsets them, I don't think anyone would really be too surprised there. They've got plenty of firepower.
Yeah, I feel horrible for Suns fans in general because it feels like everyone's just slandering them. It's just it's at the end of the day, you can't bet against LeBron James for better or for worse. I probably, regardless of who LeBron's going up against, put him up against any team, I'd probably be saying that they're going to beat him in the
Yeah.
playoffs. You know, and
LeBron's just a world destroyer. He does
yeah,
like that's it's how great he is. This is what Jordan did to legacies, where it's like you have all these great teams and it just doesn't matter because you have your fate met inevitably. The only player who's knocked LeBron off recently, like obviously Jordan never lost in the finals, and he had a couple of people knock him off his axis, like the Pistons and things like that. To me, if anything, that just shows how special Steph has been. That it's like Steph
hmm
and LeBron have ruled the NBA for the past decade, essentially in the finals. Like and then KD too by proxy with Steph. But
mm-hmm.
it's hard, and that's the downside to Phoenix is where it's like it does. It can end as quickly as that. Now again, Phoenix can win this series, and if Phoenix wins this series, you got to look at them as potential favorites to mess around and win the title, maybe even.
Yeah.
And like we said, that joy could. It could be extra high real quick, but I've still got Lakers in 7.
I I guess I'll go with you and say Lakers in 7 or 6 and just go from there.
Yeah. All right. Who's balling? Who's falling? Our NBA version of the stock market. We always like to start with the good before the bad before we jump over to the East, of course. So balling for me this week, I've actually got Brooklyn's betting odds. You brought up betting odds a little bit earlier, so we looked at Caesars Sports Book. And if you're going strictly off the betting, then Brooklyn is the favorite to win the title. They're actually plus 220 right now. They've got the best odds. The Lakers are in second at plus 425. The Clippers at plus 550 are third. Then the Jazz at fourth at plus 700. And then the Sixers at plus 750. The Bucks shortly behind them at plus 800. And then you start getting into the thousands. Like then you got Phoenix at plus 2,000. The two lowest are the Wizards and Grizzlies. Both of them are at plus 25,000. So,
Oh
yeah, but I mean, can't really say we're too shocked there.
no,
Are you surprised that Brooklyn is number one in the betting favorites here?
no, no, not at all. I mean, I
Yeah.
feel like everyone thinks they're the favorites, and probably deservingly so from
The
just
road is
name
easier
power.
too. Like
Yeah.
at the end of the day, the East is just easier than the West. Like the West, and the East is no cakewalk this year. Like Brooklyn's going to have to go through Milwaukee and likely Philly. I don't think that's or Miami. I guess if Miami upsets Milwaukee too, we can talk about that in a little
Or
bit. But
or
either
the
way,
or
like
the
you got
Knicks. Or the Knicks.
shut up. Okay, I had to bring it back up one more time, but dude, we're going to talk about the Sixers in a little bit. But like, if the Sixers don't go to the conference finals, we need to have some real heart to heart discussions with
Oh
ourselves.
boy. Yeah.
But we'll get to that in a little bit. Who's balling for you this week?
My ballin' for me is going out to Derek Rose. He actually posted on Facebook and said, "There's nothing vintage about my game but my floaters. I don't dunk or jump high anymore. I'm not killing you with speed, nor am I a one-man fast break anymore. I lost my queen early in the game, but I fought my explicitive way back to get one of my pawns down the board to get her back." And he's not wrong. Derek Rose, honestly, we were talking about it like my coworkers were asking me, they're like, who's somebody that could really make a name for themselves in the playoffs this year and kind of surprise some people, kind of like Murray and Donovan Mitchell did a little bit in the bubble. And I told him, I was like, he's already got a name for himself, but the way Derrick Rose has been playing, people probably will even have forgotten that he's in New York. And if New York comes out balling and Derrick Rose is a big part of that, people are gonna be like, "Oh man, he's got his game back. Like this is awesome." So, shout out to Derrick Rose. I think that's obviously a great turnaround, a great success story for him. And I think at the end of the day, I think he could kind of not necessarily resurgence, but people will be talking about him during the playoffs.
No, it's there. I mean, he's a six man of the year finalist with
Yeah.
him and Joe Ingles and Jordan Clarkson. Like Derrick Rose has been phenomenal since going back to New York. I mean, he was great in Detroit too. It's just obviously like most eyes aren't on Detroit, and so I mean, it was I'll cop to this. I mean, I kind of scoffed. It was funny when he went to New York. He was talking about like making the playoffs, and it was like, Derek, what are you talking about? Like,
Yeah.
it was at the beginning of the season. It was still kind of early. And I mean, he's been a huge part of that. I mean, most New York fans are clamoring for more minutes for him at this point over Alfred Payton, your boy. Um, and so, no, Derrick Rose has been a remarkable success story over the past couple of years. Thankfully, knock on wood, hasn't been dealing with the injuries. Like we said, it's unfortunate because they robbed him of being, when he was the youngest MVP ever, of being that type of player for his entire career. But I look at Derrick Rose the way I kind of look at Grant Hill, where like Grant Hill was that dude early on in his NBA
Mm-hmm.
career, and then just dealt with ton of injuries to the point where you basically thought it was over. I mean, we thought it was over for Derrick Rose at one point. Like he'd be completely out of the league. Instead he's been able to bounce around, make a name for himself. He's been on a couple of random teams, but he generally is a useful NBA role player this year. He's a positive on the floor.
Yeah.
The fact that he's been able to extend his career, I mean, those ACL injuries, I mean, it was 2012 and 2013 where he missed the entire year. He only played 10 games the following year. I mean, he was missing large portions of seasons. I mean, he's been able to play 50 plus games the past 3 years. And then this season, he even got to 50 as well, again on the dot between Detroit and New York combined. It's a really great story for Derrick Rose. It's a success story, and it's good for him that he's been able to turn his career around. Like you said, now he gets to go into the playoffs playing meaningful minutes as a huge part of a team that's going to make an impact. Like we said, we'll get into the Knicks and the Hawks in a little bit, but they've got a chance to win playoff series here.
Yeah, I completely agree, and so shout out to Derrick Rose.
Yeah.
Flipping it over to my fallen is a post by Hating Pigeons on Reddit, and Hating Pigeons posts a video. I'm not going to play it because I don't want to go through it, but it says Ja Morant says the word 78 times during post game interview. He talks for a total of 3 minutes and 52 seconds. Overall, I'm making it one per 2.97 seconds.
I mean, look, everybody's got a crutch sometimes. We work at broadcasting, it is
Mm-hmm.
we got to work hard to get out of it sometimes. I mean, that's the thing. I remember, in college and all those early careers, like, I mean, as I say it there, like I used to use like way more back in the day, just other crutches like that. So I understand it. I mean, and that's the thing. Like, I don't expect like it's John Moran. He's not a professionally trained speaker. Like, this is just the end of I don't know. Like I'm not expecting every athlete to be a super quote machine. It's just fun. It is funny though. Like it's definitely funny that it's that many times and that
Yeah.
I mean 1 point or one for every 2.9 seconds. But no, I totally understand it. I get it. We all have that verbal crutch sometimes. So
Yeah.
that just happens to be what it is. I've heard plenty of people say use as that crutch. I think it's definitely there.
Yeah. It is definitely a crutch that I've used in the past for sure.
All right, falling for me this week is Masai Ujiri, and not really Masai Ujiri, more of Toronto here. Toronto is going to have a discussion with Masai Ujiri this week, and Ujiri came out and said that basically it's going to determine his future with the organization. Kind of what direction do the Raptors want to go in? What are they going to do? And I'm saying it's falling because to me, I don't know how it remotely got to this situation, but there is no planet where keeping Masai Ujiri should be contingent on how this conversation is going to go. Like, if I'm Toronto, I basically give him the blank check at this point if I'm ownership, and I go, listen, you've earned it. You've kept us relevant. We've had our best run of success ever with you as the GM and in charge of our organization. Obviously, ultimately culminating in the title a couple of years ago, the highest point. You know, you made super difficult trades, had the guts to pull those type of moves. I'm just to me, there's no chance I'm letting Masai Ujiri get to free agency. Put it that way.
Hmm. No, I completely agree with you. I mean, teams are going to be doing that, essentially walking up to him and saying, "Here's your blank check. You write what you want." So the Raptors have to get ahead of that,
Mm-hmm.
and make sure that they don't let him go. And maybe that is him using that to his advantage and maybe getting a little more money. I mean, if he
Well, it
knows
is
teams are
partially.
coming, so yeah.
Well, and he's definitely trying to do a couple. Like he's already used his leverage a little bit. Like he got Nick Nurse locked up. The GM Bobby Webster's been locked up. Both of
Hmm.
those he wanted to get done. Those are his people. And I think Masai Ujiri probably, if I'm betting, stays in Toronto. Um, but so I wonder what exactly he wants more there. I guess with the negotiations. But like, here's the thing: he's going to be in the position to demand it. I mean, the Sixers just gave Daryl Morey $10 million a year. He's got it. He's around that, if not more. I mean, if he leaves, he's got more, at least five. Every team in the league essentially should be calling to see what's
Yeah.
going on. I mean, there are many teams where I wouldn't pick up Masai Ujiri. I mean, we know in the past, New York, and maybe we'll see if it's a little different now in New York, given the success they've had and given the newer, front office and general direction there. But I mean, Washington's another one, for
Yeah.
example, where like they're ready to throw the book at Masai Ujiri and
They
give him
already did,
basically
didn't they?
yeah, give him a blank check and essentially say, come in. And I mean, again, I would too if I'm Washington. Let me be very clear here as possible. I would 150,000% do that. I think he stays in Toronto, but again, it's like Toronto, get this done. Don't play this so close to the point where there's a chance where he walks, because that to me is a decision that they'd regret for a long, long time.
Agreed. No, I completely agree with you.
All right, so switching over to the Eastern Conference now. Want to look at that side of the bracket, the first round. So I guess we'll just start at 1-8 with our B homers and start with our Sixers, who will be playing the Washington Wizards. I think the biggest thing right away is just immediately everyone goes to the Joel and Russ rivalry, which has been fun. It was kind of one-sided early on in Oklahoma City. I'm not going to lie. There were a couple moments there where it just felt like they had the Sixers number, but the Sixers have bounced back from that recently. Obviously, a totally different scenario than where they are now here in Washington. Washington, one of the hottest teams in the league. I mean, look at where they were. They're basically dead in the water, and now surged all the way up to 8. Like you said, regardless of the play-in, they'd have been the true 8. Are the 8 seed this year? Daniel Gafford's been a revelation. Bradley Beal, Russell Westbrook have been awesome. Obviously, his stats are just straight out of a video game for the last month of the year. But that said, I'm going to be blunt here. I think the Sixers win the series in 4 games, maybe 5 tops. Like I think the Sixers should be sweeping this series. They swept them in the regular season. They have absolutely no one who can guard Embiid. Like you're looking at Gafford and Alex Len and Robin Lopez. Essentially, is going to be the trio of guys who are going to ask to guard Joel. And Bradley Beal to me also is not 100%. I think that's the biggest thing. Like we've seen that he's kind of nursing that hamstring injury a little bit. Credit to the Wizards for battling back, but the Sixers should handle their business here pretty quickly. It's a 4 or 5 game series, I think.
Yeah, to that, the starting lineup of Simmons, Embiid, Harris, Seth Curry, and Danny Green. They've only played 32 games together, but Philly is 27-5 and 16-0 at home in those games. Um, yeah, I'll say maybe Washington gets one, maybe, but I think it's at most a 5 game series.
I mean, Bradley Beal dropped 60 on the Sixers, and
Right.
they won that game in the regular season.
Right.
But like you said, I could
Well,
see
and
them
I
stealing one off
also
those guys.
also, I think there will be conversation, and they'll look at this game and the three others from the play-in tournament is how much does playing those few extra games actually hinder their ability, or does it give them that they're already at that level, and maybe there's a second where these teams take a second to get there, and that's why maybe a Suns, a Sixers, a Utah Jazz, a Nets, though I don't think it would happen, lose the first game just because they're not at that level yet where the team coming in had to play one or maybe two high intensity playoff
Yeah.
caliber games. So but again, that's reaching, and I think at the end of the day it'll level out. And so if they do get a game, maybe that's where it happens, but it's one maybe at
Uh,
most.
Let me be as clear as possible. if the Sixers do not make the conference finals, it is a colossal failure, and you need to reevaluate everything
Hmm.
given the way this bracket has broke. I think at that point, you do start to have to look in the mirror and make tough decisions regarding Ben, regarding Joel, like what exactly you want it to look like, what your long-term vision is going forward, just because of how the bracket broke. Like
Yeah.
to me, there is no scenario where the Sixers, if they are serious finals contenders, should not be able to handle the Wizards in the first round and then beat whoever comes out of New York and Atlanta. Both of those teams have been good stories this year, but holy hell, the Sixers have to win that series. Like that's the it doesn't get much better than that, especially when it looked like it could have been Miami at one point, who, to put it bluntly, I think have the Sixers number. Like Miami, of all teams, feels super equipped to beat Philly. Um, and so, at that point, you have to reevaluate. Like when we talk about what's a failure and what's a success, sometimes it depends on the competition.
Yeah.
If the Sixers don't make the conference finals, it is a colossal failure. I'd argue even bigger than last year when they got swept out. Even, I mean, I don't call the Jimmy Butler thing the year a failure. That's just sad and unfortunate. But yeah, it would be one of the biggest failures of the process era, bar none.
Yeah. I think all Sixers fans would be calling for something like that, obviously too,
Yeah.
and there'll probably still be some if they don't make it to the actual just finals in general. So
If they lose the conference finals to Brooklyn or Milwaukee and it's a close competitive series the whole way, you're disappointed, but I don't call it a failure. Like
yeah.
you can be disappointed, but not really just have it be is what it is sometimes. Like it's hard to win an NBA championship. Word to the fact that like I think 9 teams or 10 franchises out of all the teams in the league have won since like 1990 or something. And some of them haven't been in quite a long time. Like the Bulls, for example. Bulls have won 6 since 1990, but they haven't won since Michael Jordan retired. So
Hmm.
it's hard. Winning an NBA title is hard. All right. Going, I guess, staying in that side of the bracket, 4 or 5. We talked about this a little bit last week with the Knicks and Hawks. A super competitive series, bunch of young teams, both really exciting. Played their best basketball in the later parts of the year. Both handled their business to get into the playoffs and avoid, having to play a Miami, having to play a Milwaukee first round. So I think that that's a good I think it shows that they're equipped to handle the pressure a little bit. This is going to be a fun one. I think this is going 7. I've got the Knicks winning this series in 7. I think it comes down to home court for me. And it comes down to the fact to me that I'll just always like the Knicks are an elite defensive team. And so to that point, I'm going to take the defense over the offense come playoff time. This is going to be a really fun series. I think this is going to be one of, if not the most fun, honestly, in the first round for the East.
Surprisingly, the money is on New York. Well, I guess maybe not surprisingly. I just figured people would go with the name recognition and Trey Young for Atlanta, and the money would be going that way. But right now, the
Yeah.
money is on New York a little bit. Um, yeah, to what you were saying, I was hoping I could find this. Yeah, the New York is third in the NBA for bench scoring per 48 minutes since the All Star break. Atlanta's is only 95.6, which is like horrible. Um, and so the bench depth points and how that's going to go is really going to, I think, hurt the Hawks a bit. Obviously, Trey Young's going to be awesome and do his thing. And when you look at the point guards from Trey Young, going up against an Elfrid Payton or a Derrick Rose, you kind of like Trey Young's odds there. But I think at the end of the day, the Knicks and Julius Randle and all of them are going to get the win as well.
Yeah, again, it all comes down to the defense for me. Like I think I don't know. Both their rotations kind of equal out. I really like Atlanta is the slept on team to me. Like they may have the more household name, I think, in Trey Young than
Yeah.
anybody on New York. But I mean, New York has been. I mean, it's New York. Like they've been one of the success stories of the league this year. I think a lot of people have taken note to what not just Julius Randle, but like what RJ Barrett is doing,
Yeah.
what Derrick Rose has done, and we talked a little bit earlier, what Nerlens Noel has done for them defensively. Run down the list. Guys like Emmanuel Quickly who have developed. Like, there's a lot to be excited about if you're in New York. Atlanta, on the other hand, again, I think part of it was because they struggled early on. Obviously, Lloyd Pierce got fired, and shout out to Nate McMillan. It sounds like he's going to get locked into a long term deal there in Atlanta after the season ends, as he should. As soon as he took over, the team turned around and kind of reached the expectations that they were going to. I like a lot of players on Atlanta. Obviously, Clint Capella is another one who's just been awesome this year. Really unheralded and one of the better defensive players in the league. And to that token, I like their front court depth with him and John Collins a little bit. Like I'm excited to see what they can do playoff time. I think that they're going to kind of be the keys. We know Trey is going to be Trey, but if they can get John Collins going, I really think that they've got a chance to make this series competitive and win. I'm going to pick New York again. I think it comes down to home court for me.
Yeah.
But this is going to be a 7-game series. I think this is really going to be competitive.
I'm gonna want it to be New York too, because in my mind I'm gonna try to justify flying to New York to go see the Sixers New York play each other.
Well, you've seen so because the Sixers have the Wizards, if the bracket breaks, so if the Sixers play the Wizards, if the Knicks win, and if Brooklyn comes out of the other side of the bracket for the conference finals, the Sixers wouldn't have to get on the plane until the finals, which is just so crazy to think about. Just straight up the Amtrak series.
Hey,
Um,
they look, that might help too. You never know. That could be a benefit.
Yeah, I mean, in Brooklyn, Brooklyn is Brooklyn. I don't know if I'd ever say that I want Brooklyn, but you know how it goes.
Yeah.
You just got to play who's in front of you at the end of the day. So,
Hmm.
and like I said, there's a very good chance Atlanta flips this real quick. I mean, if Atlanta comes out and beats New York in the series, I don't think anyone would be terribly surprised. To be quite honest, from a matchup perspective, I think I'd rather have Atlanta if I'm a Sixers fan in the second round than I would New York. New York is going to wear you out. They're annoying as hell defensively. Like they are going to just beat the hell out of you for 6, 7 games. Like even in the second round, like if the Sixers were to play the Knicks, that's a 6-game series to me. I'm not going to ever sleep on this team. You don't accidentally luck into a 4 seed. Like at some
Yeah.
point, it stops being just like a young team that's playing well. Like they start actually being a good team. Tibbs has been here before. There's vets on the roster. And again, those are kind of the reasons why I'm going to pick New York over Atlanta in the series. All right, flipping to the other side of the bracket, probably to me, I mean, Brooklyn, Boston. I've got Brooklyn sweeping. I don't even really have a ton to say about this series. Jason Tatum and Kemba Walker are awesome, but without them having Jaylen Brown, they did get Robert Williams back. But again, it's just a lack of depth. Like I have just zero trust beyond those top two. Like Tatum and Kemba could get you 70 points by themselves. We saw it the other night. But I just beyond that, I mean, when Jaylen Brown there, I said you had an elite top three, and then just 4 through 12 was so suspect on that Celtics roster. And that's just kind of how I feel still. I mean, Tristan Thompson had an awesome playing game, so that's good to see. But I think Brooklyn, especially with Harden back in the mix, like Harden is just playing so well right now.
Yeah.
And I think they cruise. I think they cruise because Boston's going to have to. Are you really going to be able to try to outscore this team? I guess that's my point. Like you're going
No.
to have everything go right. Like I think this is a sweep, honestly.
Yeah. I mean, Kevin Durant, James Harden, Kyrie Irving, 3 of the 13 players to average 24 points or more. They also, what was I reading? They also, with Joe Harris, right? Setting the second best mark in NBA history for a player with at least 400 3-point attempts. I think Kyle Korver's the only one that has a better percentage than him. Joe Harris is at 47.5. So, yeah, how do you keep up offensively with this team? You don't. And yeah, I'm kind of with you. I think it's Nets in 4.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's a different story if Jaylen Brown is there. I think maybe you could convince me into them stealing one game right there. And I was impressed by Boston against Washington. Like I picked Washington that game just because it's been kind of one of those seasons for Boston,
Yeah.
just where a lot hasn't gone right. But so I was super impressed by Tatum, especially where that's what you need out of your star players in an expectation game, and that's good to see. I also just think Brooklyn is arguably the best team in the NBA when they have all three of Harden, Kyrie, and KD playing. Like I think any of these first round teams, with the exception of maybe the matchup we're going to talk to, they would handle pretty easily. But that gets us to me into, I mean, it's this and Phoenix Lakers to me are clearly the best first round series in the entire NBA.
Agreed.
Milwaukee, Miami, first round, 3-6 matchup. You've got plenty of different storylines here. Obviously, with last year with the second round, with how that went. I mean, Miami took Milwaukee's lunch money last year, kind of humiliated them a little bit. Now, Milwaukee put a lot of the BS aside when they re-signed Giannis in the offseason. This is where I think the acquisition of Drew Holiday is going to pay off. Like Drew Holiday is the type of player that you get come playoff time who can lock the other team's best player down. You imagine you're going to put him on Jimmy Butler for large portions of time. Chris Middleton is good for 2025 no matter what. We know he's cash money there. Miami, though, playing their best basketball of the year, best offensive rating in the league since May. Really feels like their rotations are figuring it out. Dragic has been excellent off the bench right again at this time of year. He was doing that at this time last year. Tyler Hero is warming up. He's starting to hit his shots, which he, first 3 quarters of the year was kind of Looks like he's starting to round back into playoff form. You always know Duncan Robinson is a threat. Bam is Bam. I think he can guard anybody in the league. And Jimmy is Jimmy. We know what he does now by this point. This is a really tough series. That said, though, I feel like I'm building all that up to say that Miami is going to upset, but I don't. I do think Milwaukee handles business. I think it goes 7, but I think Giannis, because he's not the MVP frontrunner in a weird way, I think that's been a blessing. Like, Giannis's bag is so much more equipped for the playoffs this year. Like, I'm so impressed with his post moves. I'm so impressed with the different ways that he's been able to get into the lane, essentially. Like, he's not just this one dynamic, like, he's not just a put his head down and drive type player anymore. He's found different ways to finish in the paint. Like, I just feel like he's more equipped for the playoffs than he's ever been. I think this is a statement type series. I think there's no one else here that wants it. Milwaukee, to me, impressed me and kind of showed they were different a little. And I know you don't want to hang it on the regular season, but they could have rolled over and just let Miami win and kind of avoided them this first round the way that the Clippers tried to get themselves out of the Lakers bracket, and instead said, no, we're going to take you head on. And they punched him in the mouth and said, yo, we're ready. Like, you're coming to us. You got to come to Milwaukee. You're on our home court come playoff series. I don't know. Milwaukee's been built for this. Miami's playing really well. Like, I'm not going to discount Miami. Spo is a genius come playoff time, especially defensively. I'm sure they're going to have some crazy scheme for Giannis that he hasn't probably unleashed yet. I think this is a 7-game series. I do think Milwaukee pulls it out, though. I think home court matters. I think it's different than last year, and I just think they're on a mission. They're in a prove it mode, and I think this is a really, really strong way for them to prove it. Because I said it last week. Miami's road is the hardest. If Miami messes around and wins the title this year, you're already looking at Giannis, in my opinion, as an all-time great. Like, that's how he's arguably already there anyway. But if he runs the gauntlet this year and goes through Miami in the first round, likely Brooklyn in the second, Philly likely in the third, and then whoever comes out of the Western Conference, you can't get a much better 4 than that. I mean, that shades of Dirk in 2011. That it's that type of run where it's like, whoa, this is special. Just beating every single good team. Spoiler alert, I don't think they're going to beat Brooklyn. I do think that's where it ends. I think Brooklyn advances in a tough series when they both get to the second round. We'll talk about that a little later, though. In the meantime, though, I do think Milwaukee gets it done against Miami. It's a stressful 7-game series. It's going to be a slugfest. But I think Milwaukee gets it done this year.
I think this might be one of the best ones to watch. In the first round at least. I was reading a thing saying that Jimmy Butler didn't play in any of the regular seasons that the Heat and Bucks had, so you almost can't even gauge, how they're going to approach that situation. But
yeah,
another thing that was pointed out a few times is the pace of play. The Bucks play really fast, and the Heat play really slow. So it's like, again, a clash of approaches, and so I think it'll be insanely fun to watch. You got the shooters, you got the Jimmy Butler antics, you got the Giannis appeal. Like, this is definitely going to be one of the best ones to watch. But I kind of agree with you. I think at the end of the day, it's going to be Bucks in about 6 or 7.
So real quick before we get out of here, which of these? I mean, I feel like in the Eastern Conference it's easy. In the West, we talked about a little earlier because I don't consider the Lakers an upset, but we would think that Portland would be the upset over Nuggets if you're talking seeding. In the Eastern Conference, I mean, the easiest pick is obviously Miami over Milwaukee, right? If we're going to call it an upset.
Yeah.
I mean, the Hawks, it's tough for me because, like, I don't consider the Hawks over Knicks an upset, put it that way. Like, I think it'd be a mini upset, but I don't think that's a shocking upset. But to that token, that's kind of how I feel about Miami with Milwaukee. Like, it would be shocking, but, like, would it? Miami just went to the finals last year.
It would be shocking more from the standpoint that it's a 3 getting beat by a 6.
It would be it would be a stunner for Milwaukee. If Milwaukee loses in the first round after everything that they did in this offseason to get ready, like, that would be, that to me would be the equivalent of, like, the Sixers don't make the conference finals. Like, that's just probably the most devastating thing that could happen to them would be losing to Miami in the first round. Losing to Brooklyn in the second round would be a tough sell because that's where they lost lost last year, but it's also Brooklyn. Like, I think you have to look at, like, I think Brooklyn is going to win the Eastern Conference. So to me, it's like, well, what's the difference if you lose them in the conference finals versus when you
Yeah.
lose them in the second round? It'd be the same way how I would feel if the Sixers were in that second round. It's like, I know that would be bitter for some people. The Sixers obviously haven't been in the conference finals since '01, but you have to weigh the circumstances. Like, losing to Brooklyn in the second round isn't really that disheartening. Like, I don't think Miami should be like, losing to Miami shouldn't be the end of the world, but it will be given what's happened the past couple of years and the fact that Miami bounced you last year when I think there were even more expectations. I mean, and last year, of course, the pressure was on too because they didn't know what was going to happen with Giannis last year. So
Yeah.
those
No.
would be the two. I think the 2 and 7, or I should say the not the 2 and 7, the 1 and 2, the Sixers and Brooklyn, I think are fine. I wouldn't even remotely worry about either of those teams getting upset.
It would be very surprising if that happens, honestly. And I can only imagine the articles and the headlines and the talk that would be going on for that. But
Yeah,
either way, the NBA playoffs are here, and we are all for it. As you can imagine, obviously, exciting times ahead.
yeah. I would say
As
it's 11-20. Oh, my bad. Go ahead.
Well, I was gonna say, as of listening to this, you already know kind of the pace of how it's going for the playoffs to start. So some of this you'll be laughing, or you'll be like, yeah, they're kind of right. Hopefully, that more than laughing, but we'll
Yeah,
see.
I was gonna say as of recording this, so we're finishing this up right now. It's Saturday, May 22nd at 11:19 a.m. So the first game is at 2 o'clock. We get right with it,
Hmm.
Eastern time, of course, with Milwaukee and Miami. So we will definitely be locked into that. Thank you everybody for listening to this episode of the Driving Dish NBA podcast. Appreciate you guys as always. Just as our general playoff disclaimer, our episodes, generally drop on a Monday, sometime earlier in the week. Sometimes you'll get more a week, sometimes you'll get less a week. Like, it kind of varies with the schedule. We try to make these as timely as possible, obviously. So just, one will be coming, put it that way. We're not going to hang you guys out to dry too long. And some weeks we may have even two. We've got a couple of surprises lined up here over the next few weeks. So stay tuned for that. You find us anywhere you find a podcast. Leave us a review on iTunes, good or bad. We will read them. Otherwise, if you're an Android user, Stitcher, Spreaker, Spotify, Google Play Store, Amazon Music, Player FM, TuneIn, whether you're listening at work, driving, chilling by the pool, whatever it may be, watching NBA playoffs, of course, we're there.
Yep, and be sure to follow along on YouTube. You can find us Drive and Dish NBA podcast. Just search that in YouTube, and we'll pop up.